actually asked me yesterday, what's the difference between a horn and a waveguide? And there is a difference. So all horns are waveguides, just pretty much by nature. Now, how good they are is dependent on the design, but all horns are still waveguides. Mm-hmm. But not all waveguides are horns. So, or did I just say that backwards? Let me think about that again. Hold on.
All horns are waveguides, but not all horns waveguides.
Not all
horns.
Waveguides are horns, right? Yeah. Because
I was about to say the same thing over again.
Yeah,
but not all
I always have to think about it. I'm like, did I say that right? But the easiest way to think about it is a flat baffle. That's a waveguide, right? It's a crappy waveguide. It's a crappy waveguide, but it's a waveguide, right? And if you install in-wall speakers, your whole wall, that's a waveguide. It's a terrible waveguide, but it's a waveguide. So that's how you can think about, like, that's how you kind of separate them. But all horns, they add efficiency to the lower end, right? Like, so the deeper the horn is, the more horn loading you get. And it's no different than if I'm talking right now and then I cover my mouth like that. So now I'm horn loading my mouth, right? So I'm horn loading it. But this is a crap waveguide because it's blocking me off. But now it's even better waveguide.
Don't horn load your voice.
Don't horn load my mouth. That's right. But anyway, it's pretty, because of that, because it's inset into that waveguide a little bit, it boosts efficiency on the lower end. So they're able to cross it a little bit higher, but still get it to play a little bit lower. So it matches up with that 7 or 6 or whatever inch mid-range that's below it a little bit better than a standard tweeter on a flat baffle would with the same mid-range mid-woofer driver.
So there's always a trade-off, right?
Right, yeah. And the reason that matters for those who don't know is you're trying to match the dispersion pattern as you hand off from your mid-range to your tweeter, right? So if you have a really bad handoff, then that means that whatever you hear coming directly at you from the speaker is not going to be the same thing that's fired out to the walls and reflected back to you, and then that creates like a timbre mismatch. So the idea is that you want to have the same sound coming toward you as basically is going to the walls, even though the walls are just reduced in level.
So where's their diminishing returns with regards to a horn and using it for efficiency? Because I've seen some speakers like gigantic horns, right, in these hi-fi shows that are like hilariously huge, right?
Yeah.
Like, at what point is like, no, that's a little too much.
Well, like, so a lot of those guys, they're trying to horn load the mid range, which means that they're trying to cross over like 500 hertz. So if you go to a typical cinema, and this is just anecdotal, but if you go to a typical cinema, in my experience, at least with the older cinemas that I've seen the interiors of, they're crossing their horns down at like 500, 600 hertz. And so they've got a big 15-inch woofer, and then they've got it crossed to it's a 4-inch diameter on the magnet, but a 2-inch compression driver. And then that compression driver is horn loaded. So it's got a big horn or waveguide stuck on front of it. And then that allows them to get more range out of that. So normally, like that 2-inch, let's say if it were like a standard tweeter, you might not be able to cross it below 1 kilohertz. But when you start horn loading it, you add efficiency, you add a sensitivity bump to it, you get a little bit more range down lower, and then that keeps the driver able to play to a certain volume without getting strained too much. And then you just use a proper crossover on it.
Wow. I wonder if they need to do that because they have to go through the screen too. I mean, of course, distance, but also they have to go through the screen, and there's going to be a trouble.
I mean, most of those should be a 3-way, and some of them should probably be a 4-way, if we're being honest, because that's the trade-off. Is when you cross over lower, usually you're going to be doing it with the driver that can handle that, and then that also means that at some point on the top end is when that driver starts to have issues like either breakup or dispersion characteristics, and then that means you've got to introduce another driver into it to help fill in that 10K plus range.
Is there an inherent sound from a horn? Because people always say like,
people say that. Well, that's because it goes like this. But if you design it to to flatten that hump out, like if you were looking at a frequency response curve, you would normally see you take a standard tweeter and let's say it's really flat to 1 kilohertz and then it starts rolling off on its own just naturally, right? Then you put it in a horn. Now you've got a bump around like let's say 2 kilohertz and it just peaks up. Well, that peak, that resonance is what people hear as that shouty sound or something like that. And it sounds bad, right? But if you design it properly with an active crossover or a passive crossover, you bring that resonance back down and you kind of smooth it out. And now it's flattened. But the difference there is now you've got more extended range. So you might be able to cross over at 1 kilohertz without much issue. Whereas before, maybe 2 kilohertz was the lowest you could cross it.
I see. So
it's just people
do something to it.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely legitimacy to people saying that horns have a horn sound, but that's just because it was a bad horn.
Yeah,
right. But we know enough now that they don't have, hopefully we don't have bad horns anymore.
Let's see. And don't forget, it all goes away once you put in that tube amplifier, right?
Oh, every bit of it.
tube amplifier
it makes everything. Yeah. Exactly.
Oh man.
Did you hear amplifier? Yeah, I did.
So yeah, because you hear a lot of people saying that like, oh, it's horn because, and like anytime just other reviewers, and this is not recent stuff I've seen before, where anytime they review something with a horn, they always have to mention that it has some certain sound because of the horn, right?
No, that's nonsense.
And it's like,
yeah,
are you sure, or is this because you saw it and you assume like, oh, it's got to sound like that?
Right, it's because they have no idea what they're talking about. I mean, that's the truth. I mean, I tell them that to their faces. The majority of them have no idea what they're saying. They're just regurgitating something they saw, 6 months ago when they decided they wanted to start. Yeah, or read when they wanted to start making a YouTube and start selling people crap just to be a YouTube celebrity.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit bitter about it, but whatever. But there is legitimacy to it because back in the day, and I'll say the 70s, 80s, 90s. I mean, even today, some people make crappy horn drivers, right? Mm-hmm. But a good horn design doesn't have that. Now, having said that, it's not so much the horn, it's the waveguide. So the waveguide will do a good job at controlling dispersion. And usually, let's say you have a tweeter on a flat baffle, it's plus or minus 90 degrees at the front. So it's 180 degrees full coverage up into about 8 kilohertz or so, where it starts to beam, it starts to narrow up, but it's still pretty wide, let's say plus or minus 50 or 60 degrees at, 16 kilohertz, right? It's kind of making up numbers. Mm-hmm. On the flip side of that, most horns, they're going to be controlling that radiation. So even on the lower end, at most, it's going to be maybe plus or minus 30 degrees, plus or minus 50 degrees. So it's not going to send out as much energy and sound into the room. It's going to be more focused toward the listener. And so that's why, generally speaking, wave-guided or horn speakers sound so much different than a typical speaker with a tweeter on a flat baffle, because they're more narrow in radiation. There's less energy spread out into the room. And you really have to work with trying to aim them right to make sure that you're not, too crossed over in front of you. And there's other stuff going on there.
Maybe that's it. They hear that and they automatically say, oh, there's that horn sound that I was expecting.
Yeah. Right? So in my experience, most people, when they talk about the horn sound, they're talking about that resonance, that shoutiness, that's
what they say.
Yeah.
That's what they say.
But that's like on the low end. That's like 2 to 4K. And if they said that, it sounded like 2 to 4K was heightened, I'd say, okay, that makes sense. Probably just a bad design. But I don't know. That's the one thing that I don't like about when people get into these reviews. They start regurgitating things that they've read somebody else say about something that's completely different. And then what's the word I'm looking for? Basically, you start carrying on that same idea, and then just other, like, new people who don't know, it's a horn sound. And it's like, here we go again, Yep,
it's a cycle. There's a cycle. I mean, I'm guilty too. If I see a woofer with a fat surround, I'm like, oh, that thing must be a beast.
Yeah, I do.
Horrible.
but in your defense, usually that's true, because they've designed the surround to have more excursion, so more throw. Otherwise, if they don't, that surround is going to limit that speaker from going far right off the bat. I mean, you only have like that much travel as opposed to maybe to that much travel, right? And the role of the surround matters too, because as you're compressing that, as that speaker is being thrown out, that surround is being compressed, right? If you ever take just a raw driver and push it all the way out, you'll see that surround go from round to flat pretty quickly. So
a fat surround and fat magnet, and
that's how you know.
I make an assumption. That's got to be a beast.
Yep, that's how you know.
It doesn't have to be. It could be bad too.
Yeah.
You remember? Side note. Remember when they used to try to make the dust cap bigger? Like that was a thing.
Yeah.
Like the dust cap.
Yeah.
Like, big dust cap. They started getting huge. Anyway.
Now, if you can't catch the show, we do have an audio version at anchor.fm/daily HiFi. So make sure to go on over there if you like to listen to the show.